In this next video, we talk about some of the major differences between temp tables and what I'll call real tables. Real tables are what you think of when you think of tables. They're actual database tables. They persist. They don't go anywhere unless you tell the system to delete them or, drop them from the command line. So we're going to compare the two of those because there are some differences that you need to be aware of other than where they live and so forth. You know that temp tables live in the temp database. There's only one under system databases. You could have 100 different user databases with tables spread all throughout, but whenever you create a temp table, it lives here. And the temp database manages it. You may think you're calling it hashmark XYZ. It gives it a different name, and it kind of tags it behind the scenes so that yours is protected with scope, so that if anyone else, anywhere in your database or otherwise, also creates a hashmark XYZ, it'll actually be a different table. But that's oblivious to you. What you call it with the hash mark is a synonym, and it looks it up through the connection. But anyhow, we know what happens with a normal table. I'm going to say select star into Alice, Alice from Alice in Wonderland. She was real, sort of, from customer types. And then I'm just going to select count from Alice. And we know that if we do this, bam, there are 3 records in that table. Now, if I refresh the tables in my Acme, let me just make sure I'm in Acme. We're in Acme. Yay, we're in Acme. If I refresh my table view, there's a table Alice. There we go. What happens if I try to run this again with a real table? I can't really select into a table that's already there. SQL Server is going to complain about it. Bam, there's already an object named Alice in the database. Try again, please. What we would have to do is run a drop statement before we could do this again. And actually, if we run this as is, it'll still crash here before it gets to the drop table. So let's just do this first, just for ease. Okay. Now, I can run this. It'll create the table. If we, this went away and came back, we'd have to refresh. But see the same thing. But I can keep running this forever. 3, 3, 3. So, you have to use the drop table. Okay, great, wonderful. We knew that. There's really no new information in that until you start contrasting it with what'll happen with a temp table. So the temp table is temporary. It will persist as long as the connection to SQL Server that created it is in existence. So for example, what denotes the connection I have right now is actually this query window. I could open up several more, but it's this window in particular that it cares about. When I close this window, or if SQL Server got shut off, if there was a bolt of lightning or a bomb went off, this white rabbit table, which is a temporary table and less real than Alice, at least in the story, what's going to happen is that this will stay alive as long as this window is open. If I close this query window, then that table goes by. But in the meantime, if I run this statement, select star into white rabbit from customer types, and then do a count, it'll give me 3. Bam, there it is. But if I run it again, ouch, SQL Server complains because it's persistent at least for now. So if we go in here and go to temporary tables and refresh, there's our white rabbit table with a really long, can you see the tooltip? It actually adds like a couple of things to it. That's probably like 98 underscores and then 000, and it finally ends in, oh cool, 007. Yeah, this gets more fiction by the minute. So in any event, what happens is you can't, just like a real table, with a temp table, you're kind of hosed. You can't really kill it unless you go like this. So let's just run the drop table white rabbit. So okay, now it's gone. If we refresh this, Junior's blown away too. The difference is I can do this all day long, with no real problem. Here's the difference. If I go to temporary tables now, oh, that's because I dropped it. Let's say that I don't drop it one time, okay? Now notice this difference. Here's the temporary table, right? But now let's go to the tables here. Let's refresh this because we've been doing a lot. Oh, let me recreate Alice. Come on, Alice, come on back. We love you. Not really. Okay, so here's the white rabbit, and here's Alice. Now, so far, everything we've done, other than it puts 1 in the temp database and gives it this really funky name, now it's using an F at the end, if you notice that. It's, looks like it's hex. So anyway, lovely. So it's a different white rabbit, You kids at home, there isn't really a white rabbit. Sorry, parents. Okay. So far, everything's the same. You have to blow it away before you recreate it, or SQL Server complains. However, you see the white rabbit, you see Alice. We do know that Alice is a real table. White rabbit is a temp table that only persists as long as there's a connection. Let's kill the connection. Goodbye, connection. Do you want to save all this junk? Not really. So now what happens is, if we refresh this, no more white rabbit. When we refresh this, though, Alice stays with us because we never explicitly told the system to drop her. If I turn off SQL Server, she'll still be there when we come back. If the server explodes and we put in the backup tapes, Alice will be there. Why? She's stubborn. She's persistent. It's when somebody you don't like, they're stubborn. If you like them, persistent. Okay, so in any event, that's one thing. Now, here's another thing that you may want to look at. There's one other flavor of difference between these things. We need to look at stored procedures, okay? Let's go into this stored procedure. Let's see, temp table, drop table, loop. Okay, here, this is the one we want, modify. Just to take a look at this. I'm going to copy this. And let me just move this other window over because I like it better this way. Okay, I'm going to run an exec on this, but before I run it, and let me try to spell that the right way. Okay, what we're going to do is in this table, in this stored procedure, we're going to say select star into Wendy from customer types, and then we're going to select count from Wendy. It'll say 3 again. Now this isn't Wendy from like Dave Thomas and Wendy's, it's Wendy from like the Peter Pan thing, Disney. Okay, just wanted to clarify which Wendy we were going to be creating. Okay, so I run this, and notice it's 3. Yay. Okay, if I run this again though, what's going to happen? Do you think it'll have an error, or do you think it'll work magically? Let's, while we're here, let's close up the system database. Let's close up stored procedures, and let's go back to tables. And let's do this, and let's refresh. And here's Wendy. She's at the bottom. Anyway, what's going to happen is when we rerun this, it's going to cause a microcircuit to explode. See, because it says there's already a table named Wendy in the database. Duh, you cannot recreate a table that's already there. SQL just doesn't let you do that. Not just in SQL Server, Oracle, any place. Can't do it. It's a rule. So basically, if I wanted to do this with impunity, what I would have to say, is drop table. Oh, and I'd have to probably spell drop the way everybody else spells drop. And I'd have to say drop table Wendy. Now before I compile this, let me just put the cursor over this and I can actually run that. Okay, she's been mutilated. She's gone. See if we look over here. No more Wendy. Sorry, Wendy. But she'll be back, sequel. I mean, a sequel to a movie. Alright, let's execute this puppy. Okay, now it's good. Now, see, I can run the stored procedure. There it is. I can run it again, and again, and again, and again, and again. And every time Wendy gets created, we do our thing with her, and then she's gone. Lovely. Here's what's different about a temp table from a real table in a stored procedure. And if you don't love temp tables now, you will. Notice that I have select into and then a temp table Peter Pan, because he's not as real as Wendy. Come on, he's from Never Neverland. She was from, I don't know, London. That's still kind of semi-real. Sorry if you're watching from England and in London. Select star into Peter Pan from customer types, and then select count. Now, notice there's no drop table. Here's the cool thing about temp tables. Let's hit execute. We'll go back here. Bam! There's 3 rows in Peter Pan. Now when we run it this time, there's no drum roll, you'll just have to imagine it. Will we get an error or not? And if it was a hard table, we would, but with a temp table, there's no error. You can do this a jillion times as long as there's no funky stuff like loops where you're recreating stuff, because unlike a query window, where the connection is open all the time like it's always plugged into the wall, the stored procedure that you see here where it says begin and end, that's the connection, that's it. So it'll create it, we'll do our select, and without even having to explicitly say drop table Peter Pan, what happens is the stored procedure, SQL does that for you. After the stored procedure runs, it gets unplugged. No connection, Peter goes bye-bye, poof, just like in the movies. Okay? So the difference between temp tables and hard tables in TSQL and the command line is that they both persist while that window is open. When you close the window, the real table is still there, you're stuck with it, but the temp table goes bye-bye. In a stored procedure, when you have a real table and you create it, it's going to be there for the rest of your life until you tell SQL to drop that table, whether you right-click and delete it from the user interface, or you say drop table and then the table name. In a stored procedure, if you're not doing funky stuff with loops and everything, and you create a temp table and you do whatever you want, and then you are finished executing the stored procedure, Junior goes bye-bye. If you think about it, that's incredibly handy. And as you start to use temp tables more and more, you'll come to really appreciate that you can do that in a stored procedure. You cannot use a temp table in a user-defined function. You actually have to use something called a table variable because, well, SQL Server gets a little nitpicky, and rightly so.